Hi everyone, my name is hazelmillichamp and this is the Light on Leeds podcast. My guest this week is Simon Treen from the Working Hours podcast. It's a podcast that he started in 2019. It's all about work and how people feel about their work, and he is hoping to record 1,000 people over the decade. Have a listen and see what you think. For this episode of Light on Leeds, I have Simon Treen come to join me. Hello, Simon.
Hello, Hazel. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you on this rainy Friday?
Yes. Well, this is one thing to look forward to on a dismal day. So.
I'm glad to hear that. Simon, you've come to tell me about your podcast. Can you tell me what it's called and what it's about?
Yeah. So I've started a podcast. I'm about 20 episodes in. I started in 2019. It's called Working Hours, and it's a podcast about work. So the remit of the podcast, I want to try and find 1,000 people, either in Leeds or from Leeds, over this decade, and just record their thoughts on what they do most of their time.
That sounds fascinating. So you've done 20 episodes. How do you source your guests?
At the moment, so I started off with just friends and stuff that I could, all the people that I could ask around me who would be who would say yes, and I got the people who said yes. Then I've been posting on social, trying to attract some potential guests. I've had a few come to me through that. But I need to do a lot of business development work. I need to get myself out there more. But because I'm very early days with it, I still, I'm only now starting to feel like it's a thing, a real thing that.
I know that feeling.
Yeah. So, so I keep putting, artificial barriers in front of myself of I want to get to this level and then I'm going to do this and then I'm going to do that. And really, I'm learning more and more that I just have to crack on and keep doing stuff. And, you do the important stuff when it needs to be done. And concentrate on getting the actual podcast done rather than trying to do everything else around it.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, isn't it? I think I really enjoy sourcing guests. I really enjoy speaking to people like I'm speaking to you now. But of course, there's just such an awful lot of work that goes with it. So, you've got your editing to do and then getting it out there on social media, that kind of side of it. I love social media in my ordinary life, but I find that side of it more difficult.
Yeah, it's that constant pressure to kind of create stuff and put stuff out, and then you kind of. I've been doing sort of, I do a bit of copy and then change the posts and then sort of keep posting that. But I know, you're learning all the time as well. So I'm learning as I go that that's not enough. I need to change things and do things in a different way. And then I know that I'll reach points where I'll run out of ideas for things or things to post and so on. So it's just getting myself into that practice and mindset of just constantly putting stuff out and changing it a little bit and trying different things with it and just sort of having it all. I want it into basically a production line so that I don't have to think about it, so that it's just kind of going on without me really giving much thought to it. But I think things like this, I think, will really help with the profile, because I think the main thing for me is guests, like even above listeners and everything else, because I want to get that many people. I just have to keep looking for guests. And I've been very relaxed about how far behind I am. So if I'm wanting to do 1,000 over 10 years, I should be averaging 100 a year. So I got 10 last year. So that puts me 90 behind. But my thinking is that as I stick around for a bit and people begin to notice me, then later into the decade, that speed will pick up. So I'll be doing, I'll do the majority of my interviews at the end of the decade is what I'm thinking.
Yeah. And what made you decide to go for work in particular as a topic?
Well, what I wanted to do initially, so when I was a youngster, I wanted to work in film. So I wanted to be an actor, then I wanted to be a director, then I wanted to be a writer and a producer, but it was always film related. And done various jobs working all over the place. Ended up back in Leeds. I did a bunch of temp jobs, and I was sitting around in these temp jobs thinking, I don't want to be doing this. I don't want to be doing this. Podcasts seemed like a nice, easy, creative thing that you could do on your own, but then also everybody's got a podcast kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's like, do we really need another podcast from another white boy? And the answer I kept telling myself was no. You know, I have plenty to say, so there's plenty I could go on and rant about, but
Yeah.
it's like, do we need that? I think there's plenty of people out there shouting about things. So um, I was looking for a thing and going through all these jobs, and also because I worked for 10 years at the TUC, the Trade Unions Congress, so I have a
Oh,
bit of a
okay.
union background as well, and that was in their learning sort of division. So lots of work around training, lifelong learning, continuing professional development and education and apprenticeships and all of this sort of stuff. So that gave me a lot of background in education and in training, and made me really buy into that agenda of lifelong learning. You know, you should constantly be training, constantly learning. It shouldn't be, you know, you go to university and then you stop and you've got your career or whatever.
Yeah.
So all of that kind of experience led me to basically just thinking of work as the subject title. I mean, it's not entirely my own idea. I also found a book by a journalist, American journalist called Studs Terkel,
Oh, yeah.
who,
I've got a book by him.
yeah, so he wrote this book, Working, what people do all day and how they feel about it in the 70s. And it's a really interesting book. Like there's all these different roles in there. For example, he's got this interview with a stewardess. And so this is like, I think late 60s, early 70s. And she's talking about how, you know, she has to be weighed every time she goes to work,
Oh my God.
how they're trained to light gentlemen's cigarettes on the plane and flirt with them and all of this kind of stuff. And you're like, wow. Like at the time, I had no knowledge of any of this kind of, you know, the history of stewardessing and how much glamour and rigmarole and sort of how codified that was. So, and I think it's, you know, work is where we spend most of our time. Like, I would argue that we spend more time at work than with families and so on.
Hmm.
Um, but we don't really talk about it enough. And especially in an age now where we've got non-disclosure agreements and everyone's kind of like, oh, you can't talk about work, and people, you know, people don't talk about how much they earn and all of these kind of things. And I think it's too opaque. I think we
Yeah.
need to discuss work more, and not only in terms of what we're doing, what we consider work to be, why we're doing it, and especially, I mean, I don't want to come with too much of an agenda with it, but I'm also very aware and have been for a long time of things like the climate emergency and just the reality that over this decade we're going to be forced to make changes. You know, whether we choose these changes or not, changes are going to be put upon us. And I knew the 2020s would be a very kind of turbulent, active decade, you know, more so than the last one. And then just as we were going into this, just as I was starting to do the podcast, obviously we had the pandemic hit.
Hmm.
So it's like I knew the 2020s were going to be a wild ride, but I didn't expect it straight away.
Yeah.
So, and then we've got Brexit that we're going through. There'll be other crises upcoming. And it's just so the subject of work just gives me this beautiful lens to look at everything.
Yeah.
It's like that universe in a grain of sand thing of everything you want, you can find just through the lens of work, because whatever humans are doing, someone's getting paid to do that as a job somewhere.
Yeah, of course. Do you find with the guests that you've had, do you get a mix of people who are sort of satisfied with the job that they're doing and people who are not so satisfied?
Not yet. So, what I've found so far is the majority of people that I've talked to just enjoy work. They enjoy working, they enjoy what they're doing. Um, I was very much expecting, obviously, coming from, you know, a series of temp roles and not being happy, that everyone else would be like, oh, I hate jobs and I hate Monday and I hate this. And but everyone's been like, no, it's great. I love work. I love working. I expect I'll find those people. But again, I think that, I think there's a bit of a cooling effect with it. I think as well, because I'm not out there. So part of what I want to do in terms of promotion is I want to go out in the street and do some leafleting and, have an actual physical presence.
Yeah.
Part of the reason I chose to focus on Leeds was I'm based here. So it should be easier to source guests. And then it gives me that geographic focus for the subjects as well. So it seems a little bit more rigorous. It's not just, random people from around the world. But yeah, I think because I'm just sort of online and on Instagram or Twitter or whatever, so the people that do see my stuff are people who are not, they're not itching to go and whistleblow about their terrible job, or,
Yeah.
they're people who are just looking at social and are on social media. So I've had ideas about going into the job centre and sort of handing out cards there and trying to get people, because I think the way that I'm viewing work is I don't want to just consider paid employment. So I want to consider, have you ever heard of that campaign, Wages for Housework? I think it was.
I haven't actually, no.
In the 70s, I think it was. So it was basically like, we housework is work. We should get paid for it. We're at home all day doing this. It should be treated as a job.
Yeah.
So, you can argue for or against that, but I think it's an interesting position in that, well, yeah, it is work. I'm getting up and I'm doing this task every day, but I don't get paid for that. And I think those questions about what you should get paid for and what you shouldn't get paid for, I think they're very relevant questions at all
Definitely.
times, especially now with, like, we just closed the world down, and then the sort of people who had to go in and work and the people that were doing those jobs, the majority of those people weren't at, the people that were at higher wages were more protected. We were at home. So I think it's an interesting discussion to have, and that's what I want to do. I want to, like, broaden that discussion and raise the volume of the discussion, just make us talk about it more.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And I mean, during lockdown, luckily I wasn't in this position, but I had colleagues who were having to work from home and deal with everything that was happening, and also educate their children.
Yeah.
And they weren't getting paid for that, and they'd never been trained for that, and they didn't expect that. And yeah, I can remember thinking, I'm finding it difficult, but here I am by myself. I don't have to, my child's grown up and moved on. I don't have to worry about him.
Mm.
And I can remember thinking, I don't know how people are coping with that, to be honest, especially if you've got more than one child and, they were trying to get on different platforms and you had different levels of work that you had to do with them. I think that was a whole lot of work that hadn't been taken into account.
Oh yeah, yeah. Yeah, well, there was so many levels to it. I mean, I remember the first sort of going into lockdown, they were kind of like, okay, everybody stay at home. And then it was like, okay, yeah, sorry, everyone can't stay at home. All these people that need to do jobs, you don't stay at home, everybody else stay at home. It
Yeah,
was always like, all right, well, we'll just do this thing. And it's like, yeah, but have you thought about this? Oh yeah, no, we haven't thought about that. Yeah, we need to do that as well. So it's like you can't think of everything. And I know people as well who were doing the childcare and the work at the same time. And I know that some workplaces would probably give a lot of flexibility to people, and other workplaces wouldn't.
hmm
But it's still hard. Like, that's a full time job, paying a teacher to go and teach kids. That's basically like, okay, just do another job where you're doing your job from home in a different place.
yeah.
It's a lot to ask of people.
It is a real lot to ask of people. Would you say, what would you say you like about the format of a podcast? How would you, at the beginning, not so much now, but at the beginning, I would have to explain to people what a podcast is.
I think that's still a major issue. Um, I think that, there's loads of room for growth for podcasts in the UK. And, BBC Sounds have kind of moved into there, so they're probably going to take up a lot of the landscape. But I think people still see podcasts as this kind of weird internet thing, or
Yeah.
just don't necessarily see any value in it. I mean, how do you describe podcasts to people who don't know them at the moment?
I describe it a bit like a radio program, except
Mm,
it's more niche. So anything that you're interested in, anything that you think no one else could possibly be interested in, there will be a podcast about it.
yeah.
And one of the things that I particularly enjoy about it is that it's so accessible. So anyone, I mean, I'm not the most tech savvy person in the world, but I've managed to work out how to do this. And there's something I particularly like about. I mean, I'm sure you're the same. I just enjoy connecting with people and talking to them. Also, I think when I first started this, I had a partner who was a sound engineer, and he used to be
Mm.
very pernickety and like take ages in producing the podcast and stuff.
Mhm.
And I've always been of the opinion that you don't have to be perfect in a podcast. And actually,
Mm.
there's something that makes it feel more personal, because if you can hear somebody lifting a mug and having a drink of coffee and then putting the mug back down, if you're a perfectionist sound engineer, you're going to worry about taking out every little sort of added extra noise that's not part
Mm.
of the broadcast. But I feel like because I listen to a lot of podcasts as well, and one of the things that I really like is that it just feels much more intimate, because it's not so polished, and it's not a BBC radio program
Yeah.
been produced, in a perfect studio. So for me, I like that aspect of it.
Yeah. Uh, uh, and it seems that's very much part of its aesthetic, I suppose. It's like what a podcast should kind of be is a little bit rough and ready, I think,
Yeah,
because you want that non-professional edge. You want things kind of going wrong, and like you say, you want a bit of life in the background. You want to know that you're listening into a conversation that's been had because the conversation wants to be had, rather than, oh, we've got to do another radio show and let's just churn out the same sort of formulaic nonsense that we normally do.
yeah,
Having said that, though, I very much, when I started, what I wanted was, I didn't want to give the audience anything. It would just be like, okay, so who's on this episode? I don't know, and you discover the person as you go through it.
hmm
Um, that very quickly felt unrealistic to me, because it was like, who's going to listen to that? People want to know what's going on, and I kind of came to the realization that what I really need to focus on, if the project and what I'm doing is to have any sort of greater value, is to focus on the curation. So
yeah.
it's in how I present the guest and the interview and so on. So I still think I've got a lot of learning to do with it. I mean, you're on what, 80 odd episodes now?
I'm about to release my 116th today.
Wow. Yeah. So I mean, I don't know how much yours has changed over time. I haven't listened to the early ones, um, but I would imagine that there are little things that you've made, or little tweaks that you've done over the years. Like, I just recently changed how I changed the music and where I would put my intro, and that feels better for it. It feels like it suits it more. So I think it's going to change. Like I said to someone recently, I don't think it will really find its identity until it hits about 50 episodes.
Yeah, it's a strange old thing, because you can fit, especially in the beginning, you can feel like you're sort of talking into a void.
Yeah.
Because you have no feedback, you're just
Yeah.
churning out these episodes. I mean, I think most of the actual feedback I've had on podcast sites has been from my family, which is lovely. Thank you very much, family. And on a lot of podcasts you get a lot of please like and rate, and I could say all of that stuff, but people know how to do all that, and
Yeah.
I sometimes find that off-putting when I'm listening to a podcast.
Yeah.
But it is very difficult. And I mean, I'm 2 years in, and I only just still feel like you said, I'm learning all the time.
Mm.
And I try to stick to it's kind of very free flowing, but I obviously have the three questions that I feel kind of anchors it.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it's a funny old thing doing a podcast. And I think that you have to sort of think about what it is that you want out of it. So, I mean, I've never made any money from it. I don't know how I feel about making money from it anyway,
Mm,
especially because it's sort of about, independent people in Leeds.
mm,
And like you said, sometimes you're worrying about, you've got these 1,000 episodes to get done in a decade. I sometimes struggle with, part of my brain saying you should do more, you need to do more, and you should be doing this and that. And then I also want it to keep being fun for me to do.
yeah,
I don't want it to become a grind or something. Like just that feels like another task I have to complete.
yeah,
So I'm trying to sort of keep the balance there, really.
yeah. I can totally see that. I mean, I should have done all sorts of stuff this week, and so I've set myself up. So the podcast came first, and then it was like, oh, maybe I could help other people with their podcasts. And a friend of mine, I sort of helped her with something. So then I started a business offering podcast services to support the podcast,
Yeah,
if that makes sense.
yeah,
So it would be like, all right, well, I'm going to learn more about podcasting through doing this, and then I can potentially help other people do theirs. Um, so I've been doing a lot of kind of business development stuff on that side, but it was focused on supporting this podcast. But as you were saying, I do want this podcast to remain kind of fun. I mean, it's not the most fun topic in the world for people, and it can be strange for people because it's like, why would I want to listen to someone who's doing a different job than me? But it's kind of like, well, you do that all the time. Whenever you're listening to guests on shows, you're listening to people who are doing a different job, and you want to hear about their job. If they're a celebrity or whatever, or even experts when you're listening to a particular podcast on a topic. Um, that person's ultimately just talking about their work.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think it's a fascinating subject because I think one of the things that you realise as you get older is that you're expected to sort of go on a kind of a career trajectory from a young age. You choose your A
Mm,
levels, and then you choose your GCSEs, then you choose your A levels, then you choose your university course, then you choose where you want to go. But actually, sometimes you find out about a job and you're like, I didn't even know that job existed, and it sounds amazing and fantastic, and
yeah,
it was never on my radar.
yeah.
So for me, I think I think your podcast idea is brilliant because like you say, you're opening up a whole world of things that you had no idea about.
Yeah, I mean the other thing as well. I mean, obviously I've got a lot of work based kind of what's the word that I want to use? But like little bugbears about work and little sort of things. But one of them is that the amount of one of the reasons that we have shortages and skills shortages and so on is because people don't see those roles or they're not aware of those roles. Sometimes it's like, oh, the pay and the conditions are a bit rubbish or whatever. But certain industries is kind of like people haven't thought of going into them because they don't know they exist.
Yeah,
And if we were far more aware of the amount of roles out there, like I always open my podcast with the question, what did you want to be when you grew up? So that kind of came just through the process of, that came organically,
yeah,
but it's such a brilliant icebreaker and it's such a great way of contrasting the rest of the interview. So you're getting this opening where you've got someone talking about what they wanted to be when they were a kid, which gives you an idea of the kind of things that they were interested in and looking at and that was around them. And a lot of the time they're all going to be similar things. You'll be like a footballer or a pop singer or something like that. The typical things that we all think of when we were kids we wanted to be. And a
yeah,
large part of that is because they're really visible roles.
mm,
Like at the moment, one of the top jobs that people want to do is to be a YouTuber, but it's because it's really visible.
yeah,
It's like, and it looks fun and it looks easy, but it's like, it's the same with the podcasting or anything. The second it becomes work, it's to do something once, so it's like, or occasionally is fun. To do it on a regular basis, get up and do it every day over and over again, that's work.
yeah. Yeah, I agree, and I think as well it's difficult, isn't it? Because there's things like like art and craft. My sister is absolutely amazing at creating sort of crocheted anything you want really, crocheting, she
Nice.
can do it. And there's been times when she sort of tried to monetize that, and it can be very difficult because people don't understand how much time, it's
Yeah.
the time that you're putting into these things. Or, you know, they might think that because we live in a world where everything's mass produced, they might think, well, I could make that myself, but they
Yeah.
don't make it themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a funny old thing, and our idea about work as well. And yeah, I think it can be difficult as well if people take something that they really enjoy doing, they've got a lot of enjoyment out of it, to then monetize it and make it stressful. And I've got to get these things out and I've got to market things.
Yeah.
I think sometimes you have to be careful about taking something you really love and trying to make money out of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, or be realistic about it. But I think that's one of those things as well. You know, I think there's a lot of things in life that we'll see. You know, we can see all these obvious things when we're kids, or you see it in a story or whatever, and it's like, oh yeah, that would be a really stupid thing to do. And then you grow up and then you do it anyway. And it's like, you know that it's a bad thing. But with some things, I think you have to go through the experience. It's like you have to learn through knowledge. You have to have the bad experience, or you have to have the hard time.
Oh,
Because
definitely.
you might know it intellectually, but you don't actually know it until you've been through it.
Yeah, it's like when you try and give people who you love and care about advice because you don't want them to do the same thing you did. But
Yeah.
actually, there's a real benefit in going through that experience yourself. And, you know, no amount of another person giving you advice or telling you it gives you the same life lessons as actually going through it yourself.
Yeah. And I think sometimes as well, when people can warn you off things, you know, you might listen to it and then not do the thing that time. And then the next time there's not someone there to warn you off it. So you do the thing, and then, then you learn the lesson.
Yeah,
But yeah, you know, it's not just being told, you know, you have to know. Um,
yeah, definitely. When you started doing the podcast, Simon, were you recording people face to face?
yes. Yeah.
And obviously that had to change
Yeah.
during our difficult global pandemic.
Yes. Which
And
was,
how did that feel? Did you panic a little bit when
oh,
you
yeah.
realised
Yeah.
you weren't going to be able to do them from home anymore? Or do you record in your home? Or
So I've recorded a couple in the home. Yeah, there was a whole big plan. So I had space in a friend's house that I was going to use as studio space. And I had the kit all in a bag to record and to go around to people's homes. It was important to me um, to be able to see the people, because you know, I'm just meeting them for the first time, and I want to be able to kind of read their expressions and sort of see how they're reacting to things.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, the video recording didn't occur to me for, you know, too long. I was just like, oh well, I can't do it then. You know, that's ruined as well. So I spent a couple of weeks sulking before I went, oh yeah, there's like Skype and Zoom and everything. Uh, so yeah, and then I started recording via Skype, and then I did a couple on Zoom. This is my first record on Zencaster, which I'm quite enjoying. I like the setup of this. It's quite easy to use. Yeah, and I want to use the different tools as well, so sort of try out the different ones, so that, you know, I can recommend to people that this is going to be better for what you're doing, and this, that, and the other. So I want to get round to doing all of that. But yeah, it was a bit of a shock when it first sort of went to lockdown. Um, and I think as well, I need to go out and do the flyering, you know, put up some posters and stuff. I've been putting this off for a long time, and it was what I was going to do before the lockdown. And then lockdown came, and it's just sort of, you know, going outside's now a hassle.
Yeah,
Um, but yeah, it was, yeah, it that kind of messed things up. But also not as well. I don't know. It was weird. I don't know if I benefited from, you know, more people being at home and being online. I don't know if I got any more listeners from that, or if I got any more guests. Um, I don't have anything to compare it with. So, but yeah, the actual personal experience of, all right, well, you can't go outside and do that anymore. That was a big shock.
Yeah, yeah, I was the same. I used to. It seems like the craziest thing now, but at the time it seemed so normal. I used to invite people to my home and
Yeah.
record them here, and it was fantastic, and I really enjoyed it. And like you say, there's something about being able to see even little things like the cues of when somebody's going to talk, so that you're not talking over them, or you can
Mm,
see that they're thinking.
mm,
And so because when we're recording like this, you sometimes feel like you have to fill a gap,
yeah.
which is not necessarily the case. But and you get much more visual clues from somebody face to face. And I really enjoyed, making them a cup of tea,
Yeah.
and I felt like it made them feel. Now it seems crazy that I expected people to travel across the city to come to my sitting room to record something. But at the time, it seemed like the most normal thing in the world, and I was really upset when obviously everything was just crazy, and
Mm,
it was actually a woman, Amelia, who I was going to have as a guest, who that had to stop because of all of this, and because she was a recording artist anyway. It wasn't Zencaster. I can't remember what the name of the original one was I used, but she got me into that.
mm,
And then I was like, oh my God, there is actually a way. But one of the things, I don't know if you've come across this, and I don't know if you've done this on your podcast, but I occasionally get asked, why don't you do, because with this system, you can actually do a video recording.
yeah.
And, why don't you have a YouTube channel? And
Yeah.
I think, I'm sure there must be that sort of, there'll be a handful of people who would like that and a handful who wouldn't. But for
Mm,
me, I think sometimes guests are very nervous. They sort of assume I'm going to be like
yeah.
Jeremy Paxman and I'm, going to be picking apart their lives, which of course I never would. But I wonder if having video adds an extra dimension of nervousness for people, and also because quite often I haven't met these people in real life before, and I know for a fact, because at work we use Teams and things like that all the time, and you tend to get obsessed with what you look like and what the background of your room looks like,
Yeah.
and that kind of detracts. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
It's one I'm mulling over. It's a difficult one. So I've been like I've done a bunch of recent ones which I recorded on Zoom. So I have the video, but I've like said to people I'm not going to be using the video, and I don't plan to. I have thought about putting some of the podcasts, or at least repurposing some of the clips from it onto YouTube, having a YouTube channel and having some presence there.
Yeah,
But I don't want to take something that's specifically focused in and about Leeds, put it onto YouTube, like a mass global space. Okay, I'm like, I can be accessed globally anywhere, but to put yourself in that marketplace, I think it opens you and your guests up to a whole kind of worms that they haven't necessarily agreed to.
that's a good point.
And I find it a difficult thing with people's names as well, with sort of data protection, and it's not easy to kind of just get information from people, and for that to be okay. I haven't put that in the best way. But do you know what I'm trying to say? Of
I
like,
do.
yeah, like trying to look after your guests, but also trying to look after your listeners so that they know who this person is. They can get a grasp and a sense of them and a sense of what they're doing. But at the same time, you don't want to expose your guests to, you know, a random lunatic that's out there that's going to
Yeah,
pick up on something. But at the same time, that's just being a person in the world as well, isn't it? Of just, you could
yeah,
be in the street and someone decides that you're the person that they're going to bother today.
yeah.
Um, so yeah, I have been thinking about YouTube, but I don't want to put this on YouTube. One thing that I have been thinking of doing um, is I want to get around to live streaming, because I think that I could get extra people and a different kind of interview as well on Twitch.
Okay.
Um, so I'm thinking of doing like a regular streaming slot. I'm mentioning this now. It'll probably take me a year, 2 years to get around to it. But yeah, so that I'm in a place at a time so people can find me, and then sort of I think that would be a good way to get younger people,
Yeah,
um, and get those people who are starting out in the career and that kind of thing. Um, I think LinkedIn's going to be a really good one for professionals and stuff. I'm going to do a lot more promotion on there.
yeah. Of course, that's a great shout.
Yeah, and I think putting a lot more of them on there so I can really, really position my LinkedIn profile a lot more to be, you know, like I'm the guy that does the work stuff in Leeds. So that has to be my focus, really. It's, you know, just I have to bang on this drum a lot until people are used to hearing me and they're like, oh, it's that guy. But I have there are other projects as well that I want to do, so we could maybe touch on that a little bit later.
Yeah, definitely. And do you have any way of checking your stats? How do you go about doing that?
So at the moment, I'm hosting on Captivate, which is
Okay.
a Sheffield-based podcast hosting company, and they have their own analytics in there. So I'm just using those at the moment. Again, that's something else that I have to learn. Like everything's a to-do list at the moment. It's like, all right, but I have to learn about this, and I have to learn about that, and I have to learn about that. But as well, they're all kind of rivers to cross. So I know that I will, you know, I'll cross them when I get to them. And I will, you know, you don't have to learn all of that stuff in one go. You pick up little bits here and there, and just have to keep thinking, you know, how do you eat an elephant one mouthful at a time? Keep it
Yeah,
simple.
that is a good way of looking at it. Simon, have you lived in Leeds all of your life?
So I was born here. I had lived here all of my life up until 1999. No, 2000. So in 2000, I moved to Amsterdam, stayed there for 2 years.
Oh, wow.
Came back here for about 2 years, and then I had a house here. I sold the house, and then I met someone, and we went traveling together. And then I came back and was in London for like 10 years. So I came back to Leeds in 2015, basically. So I'd been away for most of this century.
But you're definitely qualified to answer the 3 questions that I ask.
I hope so, yes.
Just as we were talking about background noise, you can hear the bin men come now. So please bear with. So what would you say, Simon, is a great thing about the city of Leeds?
I would say that my number one thing in terms of great things of the city of Leeds is green space. The parks. There's a lot of great parks, you know, around in Meanwood are both great parks that are near me. Temple Newsam obviously is another big one that's good. But also just the fact that, you know, you drive for 10, 20 minutes, you're out in the countryside.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's easy to get out of the city. It doesn't overwhelm you too much. Like, you know, living in London, if you were going out for a walk or something, you have to spend at least 40 minutes on the train before you got, you know, some proper greenery. Whereas here, you know, even 10 minutes on a bus and you're out in the, you know, knocking on towards the Dales. So yeah, green spaces and the parks, and I do think we really have some great parks, and I would probably put Roundy at the top of that.
Yeah,
it's very obvious, but it is just a great park. This is,
it
you
is.
know,
It's a
huge
fantastic
woods,
park.
great lakes. Yeah,
And I really like, I mean, I live in Beeston. It's quite sort of a, you know, stepped up urban environment. But we've got Cross Flats Park that cross sections the whole of the town. And I'm always amazed by how well the park is used. You know, there's people in there having, you know, football matches, cricket matches, there's people playing basketball. There's the Crown Green Balls. I think it's just, I think I'm often very thankful to the people who built that park, especially during lockdown.
yeah, yeah, and I think as well, you know, we were lucky in Leeds in that we do have all these parks. You know, and we have plenty of green spaces around us. I mean, London's not as bad as you would think it might be. There's lots of little hidden parks in London, and there's lots of, like, I once did a walk starting from Finsbury Park, and you kind of walked through the back of streets, so you're in woodland. Like, you wouldn't have known that you were in London unless you knew you were in London. So you're walking through all these kind of, like, you know, it was like you were in woodland, but you're in the middle of the city. So you can do stuff like that there.
Yeah.
It depends whereabouts you're based, but yeah, I think it was great in lockdown to be able to walk down to Roundy Park and just wander around and, you know, like, get out for a bit.
Yeah, get some fresh air.
Yeah, and you weren't just walking along busy roads the whole time, you know, because that's a horrible experience.
It is. And what would you say is something that is not so great about the city?
Uh, so Leeds is a mixed city in that it can be quite, or it definitely wants to be very cosmopolitan. But it's quite traditional as well, and it's quite parochial as well. Um, it's I don't know. There's a weird tension in Leeds of like it wants to be hip and trendy, but it also is a bit too cool for it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I can see what you mean.
It's kind of like it wants to dress really nice, but it doesn't want you to know that it's dressing nice for you. It's like,
Yeah, I
yeah,
can see what you
yeah.
mean.
I just look like this. This is the way that I am naturally. I
Yeah, I'm
haven't
always
made an
like
effort.
this.
Yeah.
And if somebody had been a resident of Leeds for a very long time, would you be able to tell them about something that you would consider to be a hidden gem that they might never have heard of?
Um, I think Cabbage Hill's a pretty good hidden gem
Yeah.
up in Wortley, because it's just got such a fantastic view of the city. It's just pretty much if you get it and you stand in the right place, you've pretty much got a 360-degree view. But um, yeah, so it's at the back of a park up in Wortley, and then you sort of go through onto this bit of recreation ground and it's slightly raised, and yeah, the view there is just stunning. Um,
And it's just
like
such a great name as well.
yeah, yeah.
I can't remember. I think somebody has once mentioned that, and I did try and find it, but I didn't. And I can't remember if it was the guest who told me that one of the reasons it's called that is because that was all that could be grown there.
That wouldn't surprise me. It does. It really does look like proper wasteland. It's like, yeah. But the view is fantastic.
And what will you be doing with the rest of your Friday, do you think, Simon?
I don't know. I should do some boring business development type stuff, or write papers and things. But you know, it's it, doing this as a working for yourself thing. Um, yeah, being. I don't know if I'm a terrible, being my own boss. I don't know if I'm a terrible employee for myself or a terrible boss for myself or both. Like, I don't know if I need to be harder on myself, but I should probably fire myself
Or
and
just get
get
yourself
someone
some
else in.
training.
But that's it. Yeah, maybe I'll use the afternoon for training. Yeah, I mean, there's lots of little tasks and things that I want to do, but I quite often don't do, and then I'll get distracted by something else. But yeah, I think the thing that I need to focus on next is guests. I need to get more guests coming in, and I need to focus on that consistently now.
And do you have any podcast recommendations of the podcast that you particularly love to listen to yourself?
Uh, One that I mean, I have to mention them really. So the Weekly Planet I listen to every Monday, which is movies, comic books, TV shows, and stuff. It's two Australian guys. So they start off my week, and that's a nice thing to like lockdown, because lockdown was just weird. Every day sort of blended into one because they're all kind of the same. But finding that podcast gave me like a starting point to the week.
Yeah.
Like, oh, it's Monday now, so I listen to this, and then that's kicking me off, and it gives me a bit of structure. So that's one that I would recommend to people. I listen to some other sort of random stuff. I've been quite enjoying Alexi Sales podcast.
Oh, right. I haven't heard that.
Yeah, it's quite good. He started doing an A to Z of like leftist thought, interviewing academics, um, and then various other stuff. He's very curmudgeonly on it as well, which is good. So
Yeah, he's always been a bit like
yeah, exactly. He's sticking to his brand.
that. Good for him. You did mention that you've got some further ideas, podcast wise. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I'm going to do some other shows that are more just, me wittering. But I want to do a couple of creative ones as well. So at the moment, I'm working with a writer, So it's like a kind of urban fairy story set in lockdown.
Oh, that sounds
Um,
interesting.
yeah, hopefully. So we've got series 1 written. We're in the process of trying to get a cast together to record it. And it's a bit of an experiment for me. So we're doing this as just to see what if and what we can do, basically. So we're supposed to start off really simply, and it did start off simply, and then it got complicated quite fast. So it's going to be an editing nightmare for me, but I'm up for it. I'm looking forward to doing it. But yeah, if anyone's listening to this and they're a performer and they're interested in doing a bit of voice acting for free, I hasten to add, unfortunately at the moment, then yeah, they can get in touch, and yeah, we will be needing people.
Well, I'll make sure that I put all of your social media and links to everything that you're doing in the podcast notes so
Yep.
people can get in touch with you and have a listen. Yeah, it's been fantastic to speak to Simon, and I really hope that everything goes well for you, and good luck with the rest of the podcast.
Thank you very much, and yes, thanks for having me on your podcast. It's nice to be on here. I feel like it's a Leeds achievement now. So it's like, oh, I'm on Light and Leeds.
Oh, well, thank you very, very much for being a guest, and have a lovely weekend.
Thanks. Cheers, Hazel. Take care.
I had a fabulous time talking to Simon about his Working Hours podcast, why he got into it, what it's all about. There will be lots of links in the podcast notes that you can click through and get involved. Perhaps you'd like to be a guest and tell him all about your job. The track that's featured on this episode is by Blue Orchid Reaction with their fantastic song Sunset Claims. Have a listen.